everybody, my name is Kara Brown and we are going to talk about writing groups today. This video is a request from James, who wanted to talk about writing groups because he couldn't find a lot of information about it, and we actually happened to go to the same writing group, so he thought that it would be a fun topic to cover. Before I dive too deep into this, I just want to do a quick announcement. My newsletter is out. Please make sure to go check it out. I've got some goodies in there for you, and I would like to see if you happen to be the winner of this month's giveaway. Now, I love writing groups. I have been going to writing groups for my current writing group I've been going to for about 3 years now. I've tried a couple different writing groups, so the experiences that I'm about to share with you are the ones that I have experienced, along with a story or two from somebody else in my writing group. So writing groups and critique groups are basically a group of people or avid reader who are working on something literary, and they're coming together to have it reviewed and commented on by other people. Critique groups, as they are referred to by some circles, are basically people who are really looking at the analytics of your writing. They're going to be looking at sentence structure, syntax, they're going to be looking at dialogue, all that. They're going to really tear it up. Where writing group may not be, maybe touching more like on hearts and feelings and so on and so forth, but it really depends. I'm not really going to be the individual to actually, categorize which group does what. I've even heard my group referred to as a writing workshop, so I mean, it's label it however you want. I have met some people who do not like writing groups because they don't like, I don't want to say that they don't like the feedback, but they are very, sensitive to the feedback that they get, and they see writing groups as individuals who are just kind of looking to tear apart their work. But at the same time, you are literally taking your work to go and have it analyzed and given feedback on. If you wanted to go to a group where you wanted people to talk about how wonderful your writing was, I don't think that those actually exist. But I do want to talk about writing groups. I want to talk about the positive and the negatives, when it works, when it doesn't work, and if you should go or not. And well, honestly, you should make that choice yourself, but I do want to provide you with the facts so you can make that choice yourself. Before we dive into that, let's go ahead and talk about how you find these writing group places. You can find them pretty much everywhere. They're in coffee shops, they're in libraries, village inns, they're everywhere. And the easiest way that you can find it is actually going to meetup.com. Meetup.com is kind of an interesting website because it showcases a lot of places where people are meeting to come and do things. You've got like your job socials, you've got your writing groups, you've got your concerts, it's all on there. A lot of the writing groups that I have found are actually on that website, but I've also found them on the bulletin boards of cafes, and I found them on announcements that are on the college campus. So you kind of have to keep an eye out for them. Another way is if you actually do start going to a writing group, because ironically writers do go to more than one writing group, they'll tell you other groups that they go to, and they'll also tell you their thoughts and opinions, because writers will actually kind of bounce around trying to figure out the group that's right for them, so you will hear about other writing groups. Now, I know that there are situations where you cannot physically go to a writing group, so what I'm going to do for you, I'm not going to review them in this video, but down below I'm going to have 3 websites that I've actually tried myself, along with like my quick opinion or thoughts on them, so that way if you can't physically go, there are online options. Now, I will tell you that some of these you have to pay for, semi-pay for, or they are free. So everything that I have learned about writing, 90% of that actually came from the writing group and getting the reinforcement feedback that came from the individuals that went. There are books, there are classes and seminars that you can go to, but it's really the repetition of going and honing your craft and getting feedback that's really going to make it improve. Part of this is also because the group of individuals that you're going to work with are going to have a very diverse background. They're going to have a lot of different life experiences. They're going to have a lot of things to be able to share or clarify with you. In my particular group, we have somebody that was a police officer, somebody that spent time in prison. We have somebody with police background, a lot of law enforcement. We have a whole bunch of prior military people. We have somebody that is a tech writer, a pharmacist. We had a professional hiker at one point. We have somebody who's studying Asian culture. It's huge. Like, we have a whole bunch of things that are going on, and they're all able to bring something. If they see some writing, they're kind of like, it doesn't quite work that way, or it works this way, or can you clarify that? That's like a whole bunch of knowledge base to pull from. But I think of all the perks that I could sit here and list off about going to a writing group, the number one is just the fact that you are going to have a network group. You're going to have a collection of people who get it. They know what you're going through. They've done the querying process. They've struggled with character development. Like, when you come and you talk to them about, having the arguments with the people in your head, they're going to be like, yeah, I've done that. I totally get it. And one of the really nice things is sometimes they'll be able to give you insight on how to fix it. Are you struggling with your query letter? Well, the people who have submitted and gotten them approved may be able to come in and give you some insight about how to change the formatting or the wording around. Are you struggling with a plot thing? You can mention it and they'll be like, well, have you tried doing XYZ? It's really important because if you can go to your family, if your family has writing experience, you can go really talk to anybody, but I think the people who are actually part of it are going to be able to shed or explain it a lot better than, you know, your family and friends, if that makes any sense at all. Now, if you are going to go to a writing group, make sure that you take the time to actually read like the requirements for going. For example, at my writing group, we usually say bring about 10 copies of 6 pages of your work, 12 font, New Times Roman, double spaced. And the reason that we ask for that is because it's really hard to write on tiny writing that's really close together. So doing the double space allows the room to go through it. Not to mention, it's just easier for us to read in general. So take the time, make sure that you read it, make sure that your ducks are in a row. I find bringing 10 copies of the first 6 pages are usually pretty good. Sometimes there are more people, sometimes there are less, but 10's always been the sweet spot for me. It's really hard to predict how many people are going to be there. Another thing, and this is just a Caro thing, but I find using paper clips are way better than staples because I can reuse the paper clips, but I can't reuse the staples. And more than likely, usually what happens is people will either take the staple out or they'll rip the pages out because it's easier for them to flip. So, just a thought. There are a lot of different groups that you're going to encounter out there. They all have a different dynamic, a different structure, a different culture. Like they're little ecosystems into themselves. And I do want to talk about a couple of the groups that you may experience so that way you're not super shocked when you go in there. Because I'll be honest with you, there are some groups with semi-abusive behavior that you don't need to be part of. Real quick, none of these names I'm about to give you are like set in stone. They're not official. These are just kind of like the Caro Teehee names that are given out. So don't take it as gospel. The first group is what I like to refer to as the Soul Star group. This Soul Star group has one amazing writer and they can do no wrong. And when they read their work, people just talk about how amazing it is and they love how this description was done and they love this representation and this symbology. It was just all so moving and so beautiful, and God help you if you find the typo on the page and point it out. Because the moment that you have identified yourselves as not one of them and it becomes time to read your stuff, they are going to tear it apart because how dare you to say anything wrong about the Soul Star writer. There are a lot of problems I have with groups of that particular dynamic makeup, but my big fundamental thing is that if you are surrounding yourself by people who are not going to disagree with you, then you are going to encounter very dynamic problems in the future. So just be on the lookout. Never take that kind of that kind of response personally if you find yourself on the receiving end of the fan base. The second group on my list is what I like to refer to as the sensitive feelings group, because we are not here to improve ourselves as writers. We're here to care about each other's hearts. If you say one critique about somebody's work, you need to say 2 nice things about it, because it's really important that we cater to people's feelings and make sure that they feel good about themselves as individuals. Now, I know I used a very facetious tone with that, but in all honesty, if you are a new writer and you are very low in regards to your self-esteem, that's probably a group that you can consider going to and building yourself up from. But if you are looking to be a professional writer, you cannot stay in that group, because if you think getting a critique from somebody in your writing group is bad, wait until somebody tears your book up on Goodreads. Another group is called the mandatory feedback group, because you will give your feedback whether everybody has already said it or not. This group will actually literally take forever to go through, because if you have 10 people that have to say too good and too bad or whatever, it's going to take forever. And my big issue with that is that I am not always a verbalizer when it comes to my feedback. If I can write it on the page and it makes sense on the page, then that's what I'm going to do. The only time that I will vocalize something is if I think that I need to have the group's input on it, because if I'm not certain if it's right or wrong, I definitely want to hear what everybody else has to say. And when you have to do the mandatory feedback, it can get really repetitive. In fact, it has gotten really repetitive. So another group that happens is what I like to refer to as the critique before you go group. And basically these are people who send out the manuscripts or the pages to have the feedback done, and then they all congregate together to talk about the feedback. In theory, this works really well. However, it has a major flaw in the fact that people don't show up, and so you'll sit here and have copies of somebody else's work that you've taken the time to go and do the feedback on, and they're not there to take it. My major issue with this particular type of group dynamic is the fact that my time is money. I could be doing something else, and if I'm going to sit here and do feedback on your work and you're not going to show up to take it or hear what I have to say, then you have literally wasted my time, and that will piss me off faster than anything else. So the last group that I want to talk about is what I refer to as the Village Inn group, which is my group, and it's called the Village Inn group because we meet at Village Inn on Wednesdays because pie. This type of group is going to be looking for a couple different things. First off, they're going to be looking to see if your writing is clear and it's easy to understand. They're going to be looking at continuity if you go for a long period of time. So if your story continues to stay consistent from point A to point B, they're going to be looking at descriptors. They're going to be looking at all sorts of things. And just to be clear, they're not there to hurt your feelings, but they're not going to spare them either, especially if you repetitively make the same mistakes over and over. Just saying. Now, I do want to tell you the downsides of going to a writing group, because there are downsides, but in order to talk about all of those and have what I'm about to say make sense, I do have to kind of talk about giving and taking feedback from individuals. One of the hardest things that you will probably encounter when you go to a writing group is hearing people basically talk about your writing and pointing out the flaws in it. That is the hardest thing to do, but you are literally going to a writing group for people to do that. When you go to a particular writing group for a little while, you're going to realize that certain people focus on certain other things. I have right here basically the last feedback I got from my critique group, and I'm just going to kind of show you an example of like what I'm talking about when it comes to stuff. Now, I'm not going to go through all these individually, but I'm just going to kind of summarize what I know each person here is good at. And I don't have everybody here because I just don't have everybody here. So the first one, we have a new member named Robin. Robin is really good about, kind of giving suggestions about how to give scenes more. She's also very good about giving feedback in regards to what works and doesn't work. We got James. James is really good about dialogue tags and saying about pointing out where the showing and not telling is. Very good with that. We have Dare. Dare is very good about kind of saying like we need more details about this. Dare is also really good about asking for details for, he'll be like, well, you said this, but then this happened, and then that's not, consistent with everything else. That's very beneficial. We have Writing Wife. Writing Wife is really good about telling me what works by putting little hearts on my page. Appreciate that. But I also will say kind of like, I need more feelings, or I need more description, or I'm not in this moment. So very good with that. We have the guy that leads the group, Mike. Mike is really good at word choice. So for example, I have here on the page, a crack of gunfire sent the group scattering into the woods, while so-and-so, he said to take while out and said leaving, things like that. And then we got Dab. Dab is fantastic with grammar. Oh my god, Dab is like my grammar person. Anytime something's going on, it's the thing to go. I don't have this other person. Her name is Michelle. Michelle is really good about pointing out where all the passive language is. I don't know where it went. I think I left it on my other desk. Really good about that. And then we have Stan. Stan's the tech writer. Stan's really good about pointing out like the clarity of the writing, and kind of like where the grammar is not working. So obviously I didn't know that off the bat. I've gone to this group for almost 3 years now, and I've kind of picked up on everybody's nuances and the things that work for them and don't work for them. Now, when you go to a writing group, you are going to get some bad feedback. I'm not even gonna lie, it happens. You'll have individuals that come out of left field with some weird suggestion or something that you're just like, no, it doesn't work that way. And here's what I'm gonna tell you. If one person says it, you can probably ignore that. If 2 people say that, you may have to think about it. If you have 3 or more people saying it's not working, you're gonna have to change it. Like, that's just the general rule of thumb. And if you're having people make comments because they're not understanding something in the story and you have to explain it outside of the story for the content in the story to make sense, then something's already wrong. Now, obviously the exception to this is if you're on chapter 30 of a book and some new person came and they have questions, right? Because they weren't there for the previous 29 chapters. You can probably take that with a grain of salt. But if you have people who have been with you since the prologue up until the epilogue and they're like, absolutely not, this makes no sense at all, then you have a problem and you need to look at it. For example, we'll use me as the example, right? So a little while ago, I wrote a scene involving a girl that was just going through this horrific event, right? And I've gone through shock. I've seen people go through shock. So I thought while I was doing the story that I was showcasing the shock. But at first one person said, well, this isn't clear enough for me. And I was just kind of like, but it is clear because da 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 da. And then 2 people said something, and then it was a 3rd person. And that's when I realized that, okay, maybe, because it's clear to me as the writer and as the person that's experienced it, but for the reader, it's not very clear. Now, the really good benefit to having that kind of discussion with the group is that, and I'm not gonna lie, I totally got heated up over it, but the really good thing about it is that the group was able to analyze the writing, because people who had gone through shock were just kind of like, no, I see what you're doing, but maybe we can show it here, or this is where it starts. And they're able to give suggestions, and those suggestions are going to be gold. You have to take them. They're good. Now, if you are going to start going to a writing group and you're trying to figure out how to give feedback, I will let you know that usually there are people who show up and they're kind of overwhelmed by how much people are able to zone in on, and giving feedback does take practice. When I first went, there was an individual who was able to find like words that were constantly repetitively used. I could not do that. It took me about 6 months to kind of like train my eyes to see that. And it's just like writing, you have to practice. And honestly, it's really good because it kind of helps develop you as a writer and a reader at the same time. But if you're really stuck and you don't know what kind of feedback to give, you can honestly just tell people what you like about the story. Like put little hearts on there, say this was cute, just little things like that, because that feedback is good for writers, because knowing what's right and what works is just as good as knowing what doesn't work. I literally spent all that time talking about feedback because the very first negative that has to go with being in writing group is having to do the creative discourse. People are going to point out things that are wrong with your writing, they're going to find the typos, they're going to find the inconsistencies, they're going to find the plot holes, and that is going to be a really hard pill to swallow, especially if this is the first time that you are going. My thing on this is that I would rather be told what is not working in my story before I publish it than have it torn apart on Goodreads, because stuff that happens on Goodreads is there forever. If you can fix it before you can, before it gets to that point, then do it. You will unfortunately get bad advice from people. One of the arguments I hear against going to writing group is that frequently you will attend a writing group that doesn't actually have people who are professional writers or work in the industry. They're just hobbyists, and so their feedback is not meaningful. That really depends on your group dynamic. If you go to a group, there's literally nothing wrong with asking for credentials and, seeing what everybody's background is. In my group, obviously, you have the guy that leads it. He's been doing publishing. He's been self-published, traditionally published. He's been doing this for 10 years. We have an individual that has their own publishing company. I work for 2 publishers, both on the inside and on the outside, so we are usually able to kind of give that insight to individuals, but at the same time, there are people there who have not completed the process, and sometimes their feedback can be questionable. But normally when you have, I want to say, like a feedback discourse that's going on, it's better to let the group kind of handle it than for you to kind of have a voice in that, because if you start fighting with the group about the feedback that they're getting, it's going to look, I hate saying this, it's going to look immature, it's going to look childish. If you prove to be difficult to work with, you will find that less and less people actually want to give you feedback. And if you find yourself in a situation where you're being given blank pages instead of giving feedback, you may need to relook about how you're talking to people and how you're taking their feedback. Now, this other downside is kind of not a downside, but it is a downside, and it's just that you are going to be meeting a very unique group of individuals. Keep in mind, a lot of conversations that happen at writing group usually will involve the following topics: how to hide the body, how to give a proper hand job, what is the best way to cauterize a wound. You are going to meet people with very interesting knowledge bases, and if the FBI is listening, they probably all have files on us. I have definitely met some individuals that I wish I could call the cops on, sometimes because of the behavior that they have at the group, and other times because their writing has a very questionable nature, and it does, I've literally walked out of there just wanting to kick and scream because of the stuff that they've brought. I've met some individuals who were writing memoirs for their children to read after they passed away. I've listened to stories about war veterans wanting to share their side of what happened. I've also met very questionable people who are just looking for some kind of social interaction, and they're just writing something to write. You're gonna come across a very wide base of people, and you need to focus on the positive relationships that you can get from that versus the negative ones. Now, this is the very last con, and this is probably my biggest pet peeve of the con, and it's selfish people who come to the writing group, and they're not there to help you, they just want you to fix their writing. I have literally seen individuals come and they will want to go first, or they'll wait until the right amount of people show up to go, and then the moment that their stuff is critiqued, they just stop caring. They don't give any feedback, they don't go, they just start doing their thing, and they sit there and wait for the session to be over. Typically with people who come in just for their writing and then they don't help anybody else, it gets pretty much the same treatment from me, and it's that I typically return their copies blank, because it's really rude for you to show up and ask for people to look over their stuff, but then you don't provide any feedback at all. Even if you don't know what to say, still saying things that work or what you like, that's still helping, rather than just sitting there and going over your own pages. But that is writing groups as condensed as I can get it into a video format. There's obviously a lot more that can go into writing groups. Every group is different. They all conduct themselves differently. You will encounter different individuals, different situations. So if you have gone to a writing group, I am very curious to know about what your experience was. Was it positive? What kind of things were discussed? You can talk about the good or the bad or the whatever. That's totally fine. I actually really enjoyed making this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it. I'm going to end off on a positive note and wish you all a really good weekend. So have a good one.